Welcome back to Draft FM, your only underground source of draft information. Today we're having the president of Sumer Sports come in, Thomas Dimitroff, and he's going to tell us about his journey as an evaluator. Great conversations. So we just hit the Senior Bowl. We're here at the Super Bowl. We're here with Thomas Dimitroff, the president of Sumer Sports. And what we were talking about here, Thomas, is the underground, what's going on underneath the draft. And you know this better because you're one of the best evaluators in the league, in the industry of football. You know the schedule, the process, the verbiage that is using, and I think the audience would love to know that. So I want to start off with where we are in the schedule. We just hit the Senior Bowl. I know teams are starting to do their draft meetings. How is the brain turning for an evaluator at this time, early February, mid-February, going into the Combine?
I think the big thing that we start talking about as team builders and evaluators is we are really going in looking at the draft as it compares to free agency, right? Free agency, of course, is first. Where do we want to utilize our talents and where do we want to utilize our money, right? Ideally, we'd like to build through the draft, supplement with free agency, right? We all know that line. It's been used forever. Sometimes you know that there is a right place to go into free agency. There are certain value positions. I mean, you can go in free agency and look at a tight end. I think that's it's a really good value position. For you to pull a legit receiver or a legit quarterback in free agency is difficult. So this is a really important time to differentiate between where the strengths in the drafts are, where the strengths in free agency are. Sit down and talk to both of your staffs, right? The pro staff and the college staff, and decide where we're going with that.
So talking about those staffs, a word that came up over and over again when I was talking to folks with teams at the Senior Bowl was the cross-check process. Can you walk the listeners through what the cross-check process is?
So cross-check process has a lot to do with everyone comes out during the year in a scouting department. They're either regional guys, national guys, regional guys, or area guys. Right. And everyone has a region or a national or an area to evaluate. And they evaluate that. And then you come back to meetings, and usually the cross-check situation is the regional guys and the national guys will look at the same players that the area guys look at, and they will cross-check. So you'll probably end up, through the cross-check system, you'll end up having, I would say, probably 5 to 8 to 10 grades on some of the top prospects out there. I'm talking like the top 2 rounds, right? There'll be a lot of reports written and a lot of cross-checking. And the cross-checking doesn't just stop at the regional and national level. It goes into the personnel directors, the college director, the pro director. Sometimes the pro director will cross-check. It goes to the AGM, and even as far as the general manager at times. Cross-checking, simply stated, is you continue to get more and more evaluations on a player so that you can say, through all of our reports, we have a consensus that this guy might be a 65, even though there might be a high of a 7.5 and there might be a low of a 5.5. The cross-check brings it all, I think, most of the time, for me anyhow in the past, it brought it to a nice midline average spot. And usually, by the way, the cross-checkers have more experience, and you do tend to lean a little bit more towards what the cross-check report is.
Right. Yeah. So, talking to you about how this process works, the key is having the same lingo and allowing those cross-checkers to communicate with one another. And I've heard you use words like competes, like quabs, and some of these terms that have real meaning so that different scouts from different areas can communicate with one another to identify key traits and key talents. Can you walk us through some of those words and what they mean within a scouting department?
Wow, you want to start throwing them out to me because quabs is one, right? Quickness, agility, and balance, right? You talk about hip flip. You talk about obviously zip on the ball. You talk about, I'm just trying to think. There are so many different elements, and but
they all have a distinct and understood meaning.
100%, yes. And you could go down the line at every position, and we might have 5 of those for that position, right? That just stand out. That's kind of universal. They might be, certain teams might use different, maybe a different word or a different phrase, but everyone kind of has their own vernacular when it comes to really drilling down on the linebacker position or the corner position. And there are some nuanced words in there and phrases in there that I think you could walk away after someone in your meeting says, this guy's, again, I only use quabs as an interesting spot because I remember my dad used to scout and he used to use quabs with me, and I knew exactly what that was. It was that quick twitch, stop-start athlete who had good body control and balance, right? It covered it all, right? So I think the more you're around a scouting staff and the more you're around the scouting staff, the more you discuss these words and these phrases and this vernacular, I think the more adept you are as a scouting staff to be able to put your thumb on what these players are.
Definitely.
It's the same thing for not only the scouts, but it's the same thing for the coaches. A lot of times you start evaluating together, and you start sitting in meetings with the coaching staffs of your respective teams, and you start listening to their verbiage as well and their vernacular, which sometimes is a little different from yours as a scouting staff, and you start pulling that together, and before you know it, you've created your own, your own vocabulary. And then when you go to another team, it's a little funny because you might throw those out, and then you grab some of their information, they grab some of yours, and it just expands, of course. The league is very interesting that way because a lot of people share their frame of thought and their discussion points and their descriptives for sure. And it varies from team to team for sure.
Yeah, and the key, right, you said is to get away from just using adjectives, just, oh, he's good at this. It's to really identify descriptively and distinctly what is going on. Correct.
And we talk about that. That's another really good point. I mean, I have a real hard time when people just say he's got hands, or this guy has the ability to run. Well, of course he does, or doesn't. This guy can't run.
Right.
That means nothing to me.
Right.
Everyone can run. You and I can still run. I can still run. I mean, that's ridiculous, but like you have to expound on that.
Exactly.
That's a big thing. Scouts who just are like sort of vague in their approach, those guys never really excel in my mind. They don't end up becoming, honestly, most times don't end up becoming the GMs and the team builders because they've never really drilled down on being able to describe the players. And there's what we were always taught all of our lives as scouts is create a report and describe these players from snap to whistle, which I've talked to you before about. Snap to whistle is the best way to keep consistency in your reports. Coming off the ball, initial quickness, the ability to bend, the ability to get upfield, the explosion, the ability to stop and start.
There's building blocks.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned the progression of a scout up to a general manager because there are added responsibilities that come with that. Having seen you've run the whole gamut of them. When you're taking your mind off of evaluation, moving more into management, you've talked about area scouts and regional scouts and national scouts. What does allocating those resources look like? And, from a company like Sumer Sports, who has a scouting team and has an analytics team, what is the ROI you're looking for from your best scouts?
Well, I think the biggest thing is part of my job as a general manager, just like part of the head coach's job, is to realize who the best coaches are, who thrive in what area, who are good and who aren't. Because there are some that are good at coaching certain positions and scheming, but are not good evaluators. Same with on the scouting side. I mean, it's my job to realize who are the best scouts in what position. Remember, every scout grades every position.
Right.
We rarely go to a spot where you have a scout just grade a position. We do that later in the process.
Yeah.
So meaning we do in February allocate a position to every scout, and they're focused on that. So for years they could be just focused on receivers or linebackers. But my big point here is the really good scouts, the ones you can really count on, it's up to the general manager to know that. Who can pull those guys aside and say, you're incredibly good at what you do. You have a really good track record on how you scout, and you're the guy that we are going to rely on. I don't know if that answers your question per se, but to me, that is a very important part. You can have some good scouts, but if you can't differentiate between the good and the very good and the excellent, because the very good and the excellent are the ones that you're really going to count on in the very end to make your big time decisions. There are a lot of really good scouts out there who are good information gatherers. I hate to call them that. It's like good researchers.
Yeah.
And there are others that just have a unbelievable knack for picking out and evaluating talent. Those are the special ones out there for sure.
Yeah, so we've kind of got a good codex together of the language that is used, the way it's structured, what makes an excellent scout. But what I'm interested in on this podcast, what we're interested in at Sumer, is what does the future of scouting look like, and how is that going to change in the future?
Well, I think the future is taking the good eye and the adept evaluator, and it's applying what we're doing. It's why I'm in this company, and it's why I haven't moved on to try to go do something else, because I believe 100% in the evolution of this league and being, reliant on the data. I've been evaluating for over 30 years, probably 33 or 34 years given my CFL work. And there is no way, if I ever went back into being a full-time evaluator, that I would go in without digging into the proper use and the implementation of data. It is a blind approach to it. Now, I'm not saying that the data is going to be the end-all, be-all on it. I've said to you many times, it's not black box. I don't believe in the pushing of a button to make that decision. But that's where I think evaluations are going. I might have mentioned to you, or maybe I didn't. I'm sure I didn't on here. But I will say to you, when I first started scouting, and I was in a group, if anyone came to the table with data, like stats, we wouldn't call it data then, right? And they were backing up their report with the box scores that are out there forever, the old boys would be all over you. They'd want to kick you out. They'd say, you suck. You know nothing about evaluating because you have to rely on the data. Now, if you come to the table without a well-rounded view, and as we evolve even more so, you're not doing your job.
Right.
The subjective is huge. And the growing importance of applying data is exponentially more important than it ever has been. And you can talk to Howie Roseman and Brett Veach, both of the GMs in this game, and at the top of their games right now, right? As GMs in the league, Philadelphia and Kansas City, in a heartbeat, they would say to you, 100% I rely on data.
Certainly.
100% I use data appropriately. 100% do I use data, again, as I've mentioned many times, to be able to compare and to be able to pull out what we need to continue to approach. So that's where it's going, and it's not only being reliant on it, but it's also accepting it and not in this nonsense, quite honestly, of saying, well, data doesn't, a defense mechanism that they don't want to talk about data.
Right.
You're in a really good spot. Your generation is in a really good spot. Some of the people out there that have football background and data background, man, I think personally that opens up an unbelievable door towards being a general manager in this league if things are approached that way with the people that like to do that. I've said to you before, it's about differentiating. Right. And I think that the scout out there that can differentiate and say he's a very good evaluator who also utilizes appropriately the data and grows with it over the years, I think it's going to be, again, a difference maker. I could go on and talk about it, as you can tell, but that is something that's really important. And I love the fact that some of the best ones out there right now will go on record and say, I believe in it.
Yeah. An excellent breakdown from one of the best in the business.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you for joining Draft FM, and I want to thank all the listeners for sticking with us. We'll be back next week.